have a very special guest, Stuart Watt from 4X Energy. Welcome, Stuart. Would you like to give us
Thanks for having me on here, Luke.
I'm doing great, Stuart. So thanks so much for joining us today. It's great to get some new faces on the podcast. Would you like to give us a quick introduction about who you are and where you're from, and then we can kind of get into some questions and discussions for the day.
Yeah, so I had a solar business in Ontario under the FIT program. So we did a lot of government contracts and whatnot, and did that for about 10 years. And now what I'm up to now is I have a startup business where we're designing a generator that is made to help people get off the grid much more economically and reduce the cost of independent energy and the decentralization of energy. And that's what my business is up to right now.
Excellent. So our podcast is all about trying to come up with new ideas, new concepts on how to save the world, how to figure out ways to focus on the problems. So what problems do you think your business is trying to solve more than anything else? What do you see as the key problems in the world?
Well, energy is a major problem. It relates to the climate issues, the cost of energy for people, reducing that cost, and also providing it in a sustainable way, providing it in a renewable way. If we could all have clean energy that we could get from sunlight or wind or other sources, and it was sustainable, both to implement, to install, and also to maintain, I believe everybody would be on board with that. And there's major issues around how you actually can accomplish that. When we look at the history of energy, we find that the discovery of electricity and how to produce it with motors, turbines, and whatnot, starting with water power, and then other forms of power that have come in over the years. We first discovered electricity, and then later on we developed battery technology, right? So because we discovered electricity first and battery technology came later, I mean, obviously it would, because you can't really have a battery without electricity. We built out this whole infrastructure, our whole grid system. We've got cables running to every house. They run through the air, like on big towers. They run on distribution poles and everything. We built this major network because we didn't have a good way to generate energy on site, like at somebody's home. And we didn't have a good way of storing energy for use when we don't want to be generating it. So, had that have happened in the opposite direction, or opposite order, say, if we had have had very good battery technology before we discovered how to generate electricity very economically, then I don't believe we would have the grid system that we have right now, right? Because why would you build out these massive grids and infrastructure and centralized power plants and everything when you can actually generate energy locally, store it locally, use it locally? It's a much more efficient way to do it. Within our grid system, there's many inefficiencies, both in how electricity is transported and also how it is managed, right? So a big portion of our cost comes from the actual delivery of electricity, right? So, people pay like 20 cents a kilowatt hour or something for their electricity. And at the source of generation, it may only cost 1 or 2 cents to produce that power, and it'll cost 18 or 19 cents to deliver it. So to put that in perspective, if you bought a package on Amazon and it was $100, you purchased something and they charge you $1,900 to ship it to you, right? You would probably think that's a bit ridiculous, right? Mm-hmm. But that is the case that we have for our energy system because of how it's built and because of this massive grid. whenever you have a grid system, you have a lot of bureaucracy. And over time, societies, as they develop and they become more advanced, they have higher demands on safety and regulation and whatnot. So those always drive up the price, right? And so this is a major issue with grid systems, is that those costs are going to increase, and they're going to increase even more as countries try to meet climate goals, and they try to lower the amount of electricity that they're using, and they're also trying to lower the amount that they're producing, especially if it's coming from non-renewable resources like oil and coal and other things, right?
So do you see, if your system can continue to streamline and scale and get cheaper, do you see eventually systems like that replacing the grid entirely anytime soon?
I don't think in an urbanized area, you get this economies, right? Where, it doesn't cost very much to run a cable to an apartment building, right? That serves 1,000 people, right? Now, if you have 1,000 people out in a rural area, you're talking about, thousands of electrical poles, kilometers and kilometers and kilometers of cable, trucks on the road, 24-hour service, monthly service charges, people on the phone to answer the calls, people to collect the billing, all of this stuff. Those costs get exacerbated when it's done in a rural area, in remote areas, right? Also, in certain areas where the grid is so far away and it will cost millions or billions of dollars to take a grid to those areas. If we look at in Canada in native communities, we have this issue of, okay, these are remote communities. We can't take the grid there. We may not even be able to, like, we might have to go over mountains or across, rivers or lakes or something just to get to certain areas. So it could be completely unrealistic to deliver the grid there. So then you're looking at, okay, well, how do we produce energy there? And right now, they're using diesel generators mainly, right? And this is a lot of remote areas are using some form of fossil fuel. And those systems are, not only are they very inefficient, but you have to transport the fuel in on a truck. You got to deliver these huge amounts of fuel. And so as you reduce the cost and as you improve the efficiency of a generator system, you get twofold benefit. One is that you're using less energy, so you get a better bang for your buck just on how much energy you're buying, but also you're reducing transportation costs as well. So you get like a multiplying effect for those remote communities where their energy is much, much cheaper. And then there's close to about 1 billion people on this planet that don't have electricity right now. And so when you think about how do we get energy to those people, right? Do we build out a grid? Do these countries build out a grid? And many countries don't have the engineering or they don't have the people to engineer and to construct these systems. So they'll contract companies to come in, from Europe or from North America, or they'll bring in these contractors at a very high price to build out this technology, and so it ends up being very expensive for the average person, right? And with all of that, because this is like a centralized system, anytime something is centralized, it's the possibility of corruption just becomes much more, if I grow my own vegetables, the government can't really stop me from growing my own vegetables, right? They can't bribe somebody or something. And so that's the issue around this. But we also have an issue within our psyche where when we're in a city or in a town or something, all of the infrastructure, we don't really think about it. Like, I have a toilet in my bathroom, I have electricity in my home, I have internet, and we don't really think about it. To me, it's just, to me or to the average person, it's just a payment. I just pay the bill, right? I don't think about, what does it actually cost to get it to me? What all is involved. And this is a major problem because anytime that I can just purchase unlimited power at any time, if it doesn't bother me, like if I don't care if my electricity bill is $100 or $1,000, like, you know, depending on your financial situation, if you're making over $100,000 a year, or, you know, if you're living in like LA or something and you're living in these rich neighborhoods, you may not even care. You care more about how your house looks. So you put all lights around it, and you have your pool pump running, and you have your 4 furnaces or air conditioning units running. You don't really care, because to you, it makes no difference in your lifestyle, whether your bill is $1,000 or $1,500. And so it is a opportune time for people to waste, you know, precious resources, contribute, you know, poorly to the like to the they're contributing to the climate problem by just consuming this energy. You know, it's basically in your home you have the equivalent of an unlimited supply. You can plug in anything that you want up until your breaker box allows you. If you can go up to 200 amps or 400 amps or however big your system is. And you know, from a sustainability point, this is not really a good way to do things, right? And this is the same way that we have in our water system, where you know, governments try to control how much water people are using, right? And in California, you can't water your lawns, and you know, and people will paint their grass green because you're not allowed to water the lawn, or and this sort of thing. So they can implement laws, but they can't really stop you from having a certain amount of water, right? Like, so far they haven't gone as far as like metering your water and then shutting it off after you use a certain amount per day, right? They haven't gone that far, and maybe they will. Maybe they will need to, because in certain areas this is a major problem for droughts and whatnot. And so we have this similar issue with electricity, where anybody and everybody can just use as much power as they please. And many people are set up on equal billing plans and stuff, or automatic payments. They don't really care. They don't look at their bill. You know, use whatever you want, consume, right? So what this allows people to do, this concept of having a more efficient generator that can easily be deployed to anywhere in the world, is it allows people to take ownership of their climate, of this climate challenge, like take it upon themselves. So traditionally in the off-grid market, you know, people think off-grid, they think of a cabin in the woods, they think of, you know, somebody you know, just building something in the middle of nowhere, and they might have a little generator, a couple solar panels, some rinky-dink system that's all kind of do-it-yourself, pieced together. And what my company is doing, with Pathway 4X Energy is doing, is designing a product that appeals more to the average person, so the average home, so a larger home. And you know, in our society, it's more along the lines of like anywhere from 1,000 square feet up to 3,000 square feet would be, you know, the vast majority of homes, right? Not like your typical off-grid thing where you got a couple solar panels, right?
So,
and the other issue too is that for people who are living in the country, and they're having this issue in Germany with their energy crisis, they're producing wood pellets, they're burning a lot more wood right now because of the energy crisis that they have with Russia, right? When we're faced with these challenges, where we're faced with, you know, energy supply problems, energy costs, you know, we're going to go back to wood, right? We're going to go back to these more basic things. When you burn wood, it's kind of a double effect. You're putting carbon into the atmosphere, like it's worse than oil, because not only are you putting carbon into the atmosphere, but you're cutting down a tree that removes carbon from the atmosphere, right? And produces oxygen. So any direction we can go towards energy independence, right, is much better. And the other issue that we have, there's many issues in this, but point out this other major issue is governments, utilities, they are limited in how much energy they can supply out to you know, given areas, right? So when the grid is constructed for the worst day of the year. right? It's kind of like building a bridge. When you build a bridge, you don't build it for when somebody's walking across the bridge. You build it for when it's loaded up with tractor trailers and pedestrians and the worst possible case, because you never want that bridge to fail ever, right?
Right.
And so they build the grid the same way. So you build this massive grid, you know, it's designed for the very worst possible day, but the average use at any given time might only be 10% or 20% or 30% of its capacity. And so you're wasting all of this money putting it in and having this massive grid. So what this technology will allow utilities to do is they'll be able to offer incentives to people to deploy this technology, and people can remove themselves from the grid so that the utility can then expand in certain areas without having to put up new transmission lines, without having to increase generation in those areas, because some of the people will be at a much reduced energy usage. And then lastly, the last point is that we're seeing a lot of electrification we're seeing this, you know, moving away from fossil fuels and moving directly into electrification. But the issue around this is that the demand for batteries and for electrification, you know, this has a major strain on the grid. Like currently, the average household is just using electricity for, like, they're not using it for heat, they're not using it for charging electric vehicles. So when you add on this electrification, where now they're using their electricity for heating their home, right? Whether it's through like a heat pump or something, and then they also are charging their vehicles. Now you're majorly increasing that demand on the grid, and the grid as we have it now is not going to be able to handle that. So, you know, if you took 50% of people and you gave them all electric cars, the grid could not handle the usage that they need unless you were able to time it. You know, they're doing it at certain times of the day and all of this stuff. But because anybody can plug in their car whenever they want, and then you can use that energy, they might pay a higher price, right? You can try to incentivize behavior by offering, you know, cheaper price at night or cheaper price at night and higher cost during the day. But at the end of the day, these are still major issues, and you know, to be able to put that into perspective, our government in Ontario, and I'm sure many governments do this, they pay large energy users to shut down their total operation. They pay them hundreds of thousands of dollars a minute or an hour, like depending on the organization. They're paying huge sums of money just to shut down, because the grid can't handle them running all of their electricity, all their arc furnaces and everything. You know, for like this is the case in Hamilton with Dofasco, and I'm sure this might be the case up in Sault Ste. Marie. And so this is a major issue. You know, we're paying all these resources for people to sit around and do nothing during these peak hours. And it just goes to show that our grid is very limited in its design, right?
Stuart, what are the four energies again? The 4X energies? Is it wind, solar, propane, and geothermal, or is it?
No. So the company's called Pathway 4X Energy. So pathway meaning pathway to a renewable society, a sustainable grid, right? And 4X, it has reference to solar thermal. So solar thermal is 4 times as efficient as solar PV, right? There are 2 really great technologies right now that are not being utilized in North America, like they are in other places. And the reason they're not being utilized is because of the high soft costs involved of implementing them. So these 2 technologies are solar thermal and combined heat and power. It's also called CHP. CHP, combined heat and power. So a combined heat and power generator takes an internal combustion engine, where a typical generator that you run, that you would run in a vehicle or you'd run to power your home, this type of engine releases about 80% of its energy through the exhaust pipe into the atmosphere as heat, right? So every dollar you spend in energy 80 cents of it goes to waste, right? That's how your vehicle works. That's how a typical generator works. Combined heat and power harvests that heat and uses it in a usable way. So it uses it in heating hot water, it uses it in heating a home or a business or whatever. And the other technology is solar thermal. And solar thermal, per square foot or per square meter, you get 4 times as much energy than you do from solar PV, okay? And there are panels that produce both electricity and heat. That's called PVT, which is PV is photovoltaic and T is for thermal. Now, both of these technologies are underutilized in North America because of the cost of implementation. So here, like if you wanted to do a combined heat and power system, the cost to install this type of generator makes it unfeasible for somebody because the return on investment is so long. Okay, so the added cost of the technology does not pay back, that does not create a return on investment. Okay, and the reason for that is because in order to install this technology, you have to, one, you have to produce the product, right? And then you have to produce it at a high enough volume that you get economies of scale. So you have to penetrate the market in such a way. And then implementing it in the field is so expensive because the cost of labor, on-site labor, is so high for tradespeople and whatnot in North America. All right. So it's more expensive than, say, putting in solar or batteries or the other types of renewable technology, because you're also bringing in plumbing, right? You have to do a lot of the work that you're doing installing it. So you would take this generator, you put it on a concrete pad, you got to run electricity to it, you have to run hot water pipes to it, and whatnot. And by the time you do all that and you take it down the supply chain from manufacturer, like foreign manufacturer, to domestic white labeled manufacturer, wholesaler, dealer, end user, all of that supply chain adds to the cost and makes it so that there's no return on investment, right? So the current situation for CHP is such that the added cost, the savings that you get back over time are just enough to pay back the added cost that you had to implement the technology. So there's actually no return on investment, right? The same is true of solar thermal, where solar thermal, you need hot water pipes, you need electrical, you need plumbing, you have to have pumps and all of these things. And the added cost to do all the plumbing, to put the panels in, to put the hot water tanks and the pumps and all this technology makes it such that it is in the same scenario where there's no return on investment. The savings that you get is outweighed by the upfront costs that you pay for the technology, right? Now, this being said, there's an ability to take multiple technologies and put them into one shippable container. And by doing so, and by doing it on a large scale with modern manufacturing, this can greatly reduce the cost of sending these technologies out into the world. And they're good technologies. It's just that the implementing them is the hard part. Okay, so what my company does is it takes the on-site labor and it reduces it to the absolute minimum, and it also removes various entities within the supply chain. Okay, so the traditional supply chain that I mentioned has been replaced by companies like Tesla, who are only building pre-order cars, right? They don't have any dealers, they don't have any lots, like vehicle lots out. It's not like you drive along and you see 100 Teslas out there, right? So they're just making pre-orders, and they're dealing directly with the customer. They're a retailer. There's no wholesaler. They're a manufacturer that also retails, right? And that reduces the cost. And because they were able to do that, if they added the dealer component, then the cost of owning an electric vehicle would be much higher, because there's more people you got to pay along the way, right? So this is a similar concept here, where we're taking these technologies, we're removing the wholesaler, because we're amalgamating them, we're getting a lower cost to the end user. And the on-site labor involved, so for instance, if you put solar PV, like people are familiar with solar, the most common is photovoltaics. You need an electrician, you need someone to go out there and install it, and so on and so forth. If you're doing combined heat and power and solar thermal, you also need the electrical component. You also need the plumbing component, right? So by combining these technologies in a manufacturing facility, we can ship out the technology, and we have the same amount of on-site labor to install a CHP as we do to install a solar thermal system. Okay, so you're kind of getting the on-site labor is greatly reduced. Okay, and now what we're also doing is we're combining the battery component, inverter component into this as well. So in one installation, you get a complete off-grid system, not just for electricity, but also to provide the majority of your heating needs for your home. Okay, and so that is what will reduce the cost to the end user. And producing energy locally is the most efficient way that you can do it. If you're just using it in your home and you're not transporting across the grid, and there's no bureaucracy and infrastructure involved in that, then this is the best way that we can utilize fossil fuels, because fossil fuels will still be a part of our energy mix. Even we're going backwards, like I mentioned previously to you, Luke, we're going backwards in places like Germany, where they're cutting down trees and they're making wood pellets and all of these things because of the energy crisis that they're having with, the political conflicts and the war with Russia, and kind of the Cold War that's going on between Russia and the West. So we're actually making backwards, we're going backwards in that area, right? So this gives people the ability to be independent in their energy usage, but also it has a major benefit for the government, in that the government currently has many different incentives for people. Our government and many other governments, even other places, are much more progressive than us as far as the incentives that they give. But they're giving out these incentives to replace your furnace. They help pay for it. Put insulation in your home. They help pay for it. Get solar. There's so many energy incentives out there for consumers. This is another benefit of our technology, is that we'll be able to stack those incentives so that our sticker price will be reduced by various government incentives. That, okay, you're getting a new furnace, you're getting a battery, you're getting solar, you're getting thermal, you're getting all of these technologies that has a great benefit to both the government and the end user. Why not have incentives that they're already giving on these other technologies? We're amalgamating it all together, and then you can stack those incentives, or they can create a whole new incentive that would reduce that price even further to the end user, right?
So Stuart, let me throw a couple of questions out there, and we'll let Martin ask a few questions. So right now, is the idea, the concept is to create some kind of black box that goes kind of outside the home, or maybe even inside the home in some cases, that generates either it's powered from solar thermal, propane, geothermal, maybe even in some cases. You can it's basically just an input of water, is it? Or what?
No, it's not. It's not geothermal. So geothermal requires more on-site work, and you either have to dig down or you have to dig laterally. You either need a lot of land, or you have to drill deep into the ground to put the pipes into the ground.
Predominantly solar and propane are the two kind of.
Yeah. So the concept is that it's one box that we ship anywhere, and you hook up water pipes to the home through a hydronic furnace, and it provides hot water, heat for your home, and electricity for your home, right? And we're actually getting economies by combining the technologies like this. We don't need as large components as if you did not combine these technologies. So for instance, we can run a house on a very small 1500 watt generator, as opposed to a typical home is going to need like a 10 kilowatt generator, right? So because a typical 10 kilowatt generator, like I was saying, it's very inefficient, running at about 20% efficient. But you need to have that generator if you turn everything on in your home. And the average person is going to want the freedom to be able to turn things on and not have to change their lifestyle, right? So they're going to want the capacity to go up to 10 kilowatts or more. But they don't actually need that size of a generator for their typical usage. So they're kind of in the same situation as the grid, where the grid is designed to be, way oversized. It's oversized for the worst day of the year. And that's how they're sizing their generator. They're just sizing the generator for that 1 hour a day when everything's running, or that, worst day of the year, Christmas, everybody's over, everything's running, and you need this big generator to handle that massive amount of power that you're going to need for a very short period of time, right? We're mitigating that by using the generator not as the primary power supply for the home. We're using battery and inverter technology as this primary supply. We're using the generator as a small battery charger for times when you don't have enough energy, like you don't have enough energy from the solar and the thermal component, right?
That makes sense. I get it now. Martin, what do you think?
And like I wanted to mention, so we talked about this issue about really remote communities where the cost of energy is much higher, for two reasons. One is because how they're generating the energy is very inefficient, so they're using diesel generators and so on. But also shipping the energy, they have to bring it in by truck. They have to go for long distances, so the cost of the fuel is much higher as well, right? So if we can improve the efficiency of fuel usage, not only is the fuel going to be cheaper that we're burning, but also we're using less of it, so we're shipping it less frequently, and our shipping cost is going to be decreased there as well.
What do you think, Martin? You have any questions so far? Just jumping into.
Well, I do have a couple because I happen to live in the Czech Republic. I'm not sure your friend knows that, and so we're kind of in the middle of the energy crisis because of the conflict as the neighbor of Germany, and we've been hit in terms of prices particularly hard, even for the region. So that's one part of it. Another part is just a couple of days ago had a discussion, quite a heated debate actually, with my uncle who's an electrician. So working like high voltage systems and stuff, and he's actually quite skeptical of solar for a number of reasons. But already how you were explaining the features of the product that you have, it sort of is already beginning to address a lot of the concerns that he voiced. Even though he, of course, is mainly a proponent of nuclear power, because, like, fun fact, in the Czech Republic, the energy situation, the main problem actually is that we do have nuclear power plants, but as part of the European energy market, we're sort of selling a lot of our power abroad and having high prices for Czech citizens because of that, because the power is not actually being used directly, primarily for the Czech market. So here at the solar, there have been also a couple of initiatives like to build solar power plants or to enable.
I think we lost your sound there, Martin. Can you still hear us? Can you hear him, Stuart?
No, I can't hear.
We cut off. You cut off your sound. Can't hear. Did you lose your mic?
No.
Now we can hear. Now we can hear.
It was some sort of glitch.
Yeah.
So if I just get to a question, so I would definitely want to ask you what role nuclear power, in your opinion, is supposed to play, and I acknowledge it might be different depending on the region. And secondly, to basically sum up the main concern of my uncle, who's kind of also works in the field, about the solar power as used by individual people to decrease their costs. So, of course, the main concern would be, like you explained, that it actually has to be cost effective in that you have to be able to save some money as compared to having to buy power from, for example, the grid primarily, or from other sources. So you also mentioned like obviously it would be of the most benefit in remote communities, because like the farther away you are from something like a centralized power source like nuclear power plant, the more sense it makes. Because what I didn't even realize, and now I did after listening to, is that that there are major losses of power the further away you go from something like a centralized power plant. So that's definitely, to me, makes it like a use case or a situation where it definitely makes sense. So I guess my question is, if because in other places, I think the question is of locality. What kinds of places do you think your solution is the most useful, or if there are, depending on various like, geographic or maybe political factors, places where you think that your solution may not be that helpful? And if
So
you can foresee any
the
reasons why that would
technology
be.
will be most useful. Well, you asked a few questions, so let me just go through them in order. You talked about nuclear and then also solar, like grid tie, and then where the technology will be useful. So let's start with nuclear. So nuclear is a very cheap form of energy. Like it only costs 1 or 2 cents per kilowatt hour to produce the electricity. It's very, very inexpensive to produce. But again, nuclear power plants typically are very large, and so you have this great amount of energy in one location that needs to be transported elsewhere. And previously, when I was talking to Luke, I mentioned how the the cost of energy to the end user is a blended cost of many things. You've got taxes in there, you got distribution, you have bureaucratic fees, and billing, and all of the various components, right? The actual cost of the energy is very low in that mix, or in that total pie chart, right? It could be as little as 5 or 10% of your total cost of the energy is actually the electricity that you're buying, and everything else is the cost to get it from the point of generation to your home. Okay, so because the reason for this is, when you think about it, building out electrical grids is not cheap to do, especially today, right? The cost of raw materials are very high, aluminum and copper and various things, concrete, and vehicles on the road, 24-hour service, engineering involved. Every single transmission line that you see, the large towers that carry electrical lines, every single one is stamped by an engineer. So that engineer has to bear the liability of that tower, and there is an insurance policy on that engineer that covers errors and emissions, right? And on top of that, when you think about how these transmission lines are maintained, they're maintained by helicopters, right? Helicopters are expensive to run. Power line crews work in a very dangerous environment, and they're highly trained for safety. So those things are always going to remain the same. Like they're in the future, maybe they could do drones, and some other technologies could emerge. But even those technologies, they will be on the bleeding edge or the leading edge. So they're going to be the same cost, or possibly even higher, to implement them initially, and then there will be a return on investment over time. So this is the main issue of electricity in its current setting, of producing it in one location, transmitting it all across large areas of land. Now, if you're in a very small country, or you're, if you're like, if you think of like Singapore, or you think of like Mexico City, there's 30 million people live in Mexico City. Centralized energy works in those settings because running cables, the distance from one point to the other is important, right? The closer you are, the cheaper it is. If you're hooking up a skyscraper and there's 3,000 people living in this building or something, you have to run one cable to the building, and then in the building you have all the electrical connections that are built during construction. But that is not very much expensive to do in comparison if you have 3,000 people living out in the country, and you have to have more than 3,000 electrical poles going to every single home, right? So the more, you're always going to have rural communities. We need rural communities for farming and for forestry and all the different things that we have. That's only going to grow. Our rural areas are going to grow, and in many countries that are widespread, many people don't understand, like, why do you need a car? If you live in Ontario, you need a car. You want to do anything, you want to be anybody, you want to go to work, you got to have a vehicle, right? Because nothing is close together. I can't ride my bike to work because it's like 30 kilometers away, right? So it's a very different mindset than living in the city. So there is a place for centralized energy like nuclear and even natural gas plants and so on and so forth. But in rural areas, especially in areas that haven't been developed yet, there's close to 1 billion people that don't have electricity now. And we look at a similar situation with cell phones where we built out landline systems. We have cables, phone cables running to every house in Ontario and all of Canada, every house, with the exception of, a few cottages or some other places that people didn't connect. Almost every single home has a physical cable that's been run to that location. A person had to dig it, they had to dig it under the ground, or they had to string it onto a pole. That comes at a very high cost. Now, that is pretty much a useless technology right now. In some areas, they're using it for DSL internet and things, but most people aren't using landline phones, right? Because cellular technology, right, is available. So in countries where there no landlines were installed, they said, forget the landlines, go straight to cell phones. And in so doing, they saved their country, billions of dollars of infrastructure costs that we went through, right? Because we didn't have cellular technology at the time, right? So I look at a similar situation that we're in right now, where there's almost 1 billion people that don't have electricity. Is it more economical to build a nuclear power plant and then build transmission lines and controlling stations and bureaucracy and billing and all of the stuff that you need to make that happen? Or is it better to provide a technology that can be implemented locally, in these rural areas, and provide people with heat, hot water, and electricity? These are the three main things that, if you live far enough away from the equator, you need heat. For some period of the year, you're going to need heat, you're going to need hot water, you're going to need hot water all year round, and you're going to need electricity all year round, right? So this is the issue around, with energy generation and distributing it. And even if you have a centralized natural gas power plant, so a typical natural gas power plant is a two-stage system where you're burning natural gas in a it's basically like a jet engine, like a turbine that you would see, the same as you would see on an airplane, like a jet airplane. So they burn it in this jet engine, which also rotates a turbine, okay, produces electricity. The second stage is they take that hot air that hot exhaust gas, and they use that heat to boil water, make steam, and run another turbine. And because of that two-stage system, they're able to take 1 unit of natural gas, and they can get about 0.6 to 0.65, so it's about 60 to 65% efficient. And then the rest of it goes out into the atmosphere as waste heat, all right? This technology that I'm developing is even more efficient than that, and you don't have to transport it anywhere. So even at a natural gas power plant, at the plant, you're getting 60 to 65% efficiency, but by the time it gets to the end user, you're losing another 5 or 10%, depending on how far away they are, right? So we're not losing any of that. So this technology is even more efficient than that, in the sense that we're gaining about, when we produce heat and electricity at the same time, heat that we can use in the home for heating hot water in space, and electricity as we need it for recharging our battery system when it's needed.
If I may, then a follow-up question that makes a lot of sense, and I'm glad you explained it, because I think many people don't understand these nuances of power generation and distribution. So if you said that, then the sort of base load for the home, or the generator for the home, is the battery, in fact. So for how long, if it's fully charged, because if it's solar, there are periods when it wouldn't be generating as much power depending on the weather and such. So for how long currently the battery can power the house?
So it's designed, like, the battery is really only designed for about 1 day of no sunlight, right? Because we have the generator and we have solar that recharge the battery, right? So if you're in a period where you don't need or where you don't have a lot of sunlight, you have the generator there to produce enough energy for a full day's use, Okay, so you always have enough electricity from the generator recharging the batteries. Okay, now as far as the battery size goes, that'll be dependent on the home. We're going to have a few different options. We'll have a base model that can be upgraded, similar to how you buy a vehicle and you can get the base model battery. Like you buy a Tesla, you get a 60 kilowatt hour, 70, 80, and so on. If you need to drive further, right?
Just to ask about the generator, if I understand it correctly, so the generator is solar powered, or it's also powered by something else?
So the product is meant to be outside, right? And because this is primarily designed for like initially designed for rural and remote locations, space is not really an issue, right? In these areas, people have tons of land, they have lots of space. So the unit is designed to be outside. So we have pre-built solar on the unit, and we'll have a few options for there. We have 2 proposed options for that. One is kind of a small unit that the solar doesn't really extend much past the actual box itself. Another is for more for like a larger, well, it has a larger array on it, so you would place the unit further away from the home, right?
Yeah, just the reason I'm asking about these specific details is that next time I'm debating with my uncle, I would want to have better sort of arguments or some facts to compare it with. Just the thing he said was that if you have this sort of photovoltaic system, what do you think about its usefulness specifically in winter, or like what weather conditions, because could be sustained weather conditions, would render it effectively useless? Like how far would it have to go into bad weather or temperature or other things that may affect it for it to not work properly or sufficiently?
The only places that solar is not really that feasible is in desert locations, typically, where you get a lot of dust and dirt. But even in all those areas, you know, people, if this is a unit that you have in your home and you have at your home and you own, people can clean them and whatnot. But as far as like locations, as far as temperature and weather, there's no real limitations. Like they use, as far as photovoltaics goes, they use PV. A lot of remote locations in Canada where there's remote weather stations and stuff, they use photovoltaics to power those systems. That's their primary source of power is PV. So, and they are designed to be outside. They're designed for all these things. You know, they're designed to last a very long time, and they do. They're very reliable.
Well, I think the question here is if you have say a week with dark clouds and where it's snowing for a week and you don't get any energy. So this system's designed to be run from the propane, for all the periods where it's dark, correct?
Correct.
The propane is kind of your
solar component is an added bonus because we can add solar at a very minimal cost, right? Because we're delivering to you the required infrastructure for solar within the unit itself, right? So when you get a solar panel system, you need an inverter, and if you're off grid, you need batteries, you need a charge controller, you need connecting cables, breakers, you need all of this infrastructure. We already have that infrastructure built into the box. So all we need is the solar panels, right? So to add solar to our unit is you're not adding battery, inverter, charger, disconnecting switches, circuit breakers, and cables and whatnot, right? All you're adding is the solar component. The solar component is very extremely cheap part of the whole system, right? So because these technologies, they share a lot of components, right? You know, like imagine you're I'm trying to think of an analogy of this, but no, I'll just describe it as it is, right? Solar requires many different components that is also required by the generator, that's also required by the solar thermal part of it, right? And so when we deliver this all together, to have the solar component, that's just that's like a bonus, right? You're getting all this solar energy for free, right? And that just means you're lowering the hours that you're putting on the generator, right?
Right.
Oh,
you're lowering
okay.
it, you're lowering its
in that
usage
case,
and you're lowering its fuel consumption.
Thank you for explaining it. I guess in that case, my question would be, so if you were to compare it percentage-wise, and you had it in some sort of like average place, not like the coldest place or the darkest place or whatever, but on like an average place, you had this kind of system, what percentage do you think would be generated from the solar component, and what percentage would you have to generate using propane?
So as far as like our base model, which is 3 solar panels on top of the product, for a typical home in Ontario, let's say 1,500 to 2,000 square feet, this would represent about 15% of its electricity usage. And by the time of manufacture, that'll probably be closer to 20% because solar panel efficiencies are still increasing. So about 20% of the annual electricity usage would come from the solar. And from the thermal component of the solar, because it's a PV thermal combined panel, you would get about all of the hot water that you need would come from that, like on average, right? Because in the summer you're going to have some a bit more heat, and in the winter you wouldn't have as much heat. You need more from the generator, right? Yeah. So, and then on top of that, you're getting twice the value or twice the energy out of the solar panels, right? And you're also getting twice the energy out of the generator, right? If you compare our generator to a typical generator, we're using the heat, right? And they're not, right? They're wasting all of the heat. We're using it. When you compare the photovoltaic, a typical photovoltaic system is around 20% efficient. Like all the rest, you don't get any of the energy. So if you have, you know, to explain it in technical terms, it's hard for me not to get into the technical part of it because this is my background. But the technical part of it is that the sun gives off 1,000 watts of energy for every 1 meter squared, right? Our current solar technology, when I say current, I mean the economical version, because there are higher efficiency versions that are used on like satellites and used, you know, various applications, right? But the most common economical version is only 20%. So of that 1,000 watts that the sun is giving you, you're only getting 200 watts, right? Whereas we're getting 200 watts of power, plus we're getting another 600 watts or 650, even higher, of thermal energy as well, right? So that is the beauty of having a combined heat and power system, both on the photovoltaic and on the generator side, is you're getting much more energy per square foot. But the issue again of these technologies in their current setting, again, if we go back, they're more expensive than if you just put a PV, right? If you put a PV or battery or whatever alone, right? Because of the on-site labor involved of installing these technologies and the other infrastructure. When we share the components and reduce the supply chain, and you know, we build it out in a manufactured facility, we're reducing on-site labor, right? Because the one you hook up 4 water pipes and an electrical cable to our unit, right? So that is like one job for one person for 1 or 2 people for 1 day, right? To hook up our product, right? Whereas a typical renewable installation may take 3 to 5 days, right? If you're getting PV panels in your home, you're getting battery installed in your home, or these other things, you know, if you're getting solar thermal or whatever technology you're implementing, it requires more time on site because you're employing multiple contractors. You're employing an electrician, installer, and so on, right?
Yeah,
So,
that makes sense. So in that case, so what you're making, is it meant primarily for people who are off grid as a solution, or to what extent do you think it's beneficial to people who are connected to a grid and would use something like this to decrease their size of the amount of money they pay for the bills for the power from the
yeah,
grid?
so there's a potential customers range, you know, in different, like there's different demographics or different people that this is suitable for. Definitely people who, if you're if you're in a situation where you want to put the grid in, that's going to cost you $30,000 or $40,000 or whatever, our product is way better because you can pay that to us. We give you the product, And then your energy bills are 50% plus cheaper on an ongoing basis after you have our product than if you're just buying from the grid. Okay. So it's much cheaper than the grid because we're not getting all of this waste. We're not wasting all this energy, right? And we're also getting free energy from sunlight, right? So that is one customer. Another customer is people that they want to have resilience. So they're looking for battery backup. They're looking for all these things. They're already looking for some kind of a system just for in case of an emergency.
No, in case
And
they live
people
in
will
Texas.
spend, yeah, people will spend like 20, 30,000, 40, $50,000, you know, just to have backup power that they never use. Like, why not have a product that you can use? It saves you money and you have backup power, right? And then there's also people that they want to take ownership of their impact on the environment, the climate, and so on, right? So, you know, people who are vegan, they believe that they don't want to hurt animals and so on and so forth, right? They take a personal action, they change their behavior, right? They change what they eat personally to support that. And likewise, people who put solar up, many people do it for a return on investment and to save money, but there are a large portion of people that do it because they believe that it's helping with the environment, it's a cleaner source of energy, and so on, right? And then above and beyond that, you also have the ability, when you create a consumer product, it can also be used for business. When you create something that is designed for a large market, right? You can get a better economy scale than you can if you're building something up for a business, right? So businesses that are small or medium, that want a similar technology, if they were to go to what's on the market right now, they're going to pay a higher price for implementation because they're going to get a product that is sold to fewer customers, right? It's kind of like, you know, if you were to buy a truck specifically for business, right? Or if you were to use like a consumer vehicle instead, right? You know, if you have a small company and you want to, you know, you could use like an economy car, like Honda Civic or, you know, Hyundai or something. But if you buy the truck and you're like, oh, I've got the truck and everything like that, you're going to pay a much higher price for that vehicle because it's sold to fewer people, right? So that's the concept there, is in creating the product so it can also be stackable. So it would be more economical to buy 2 or 3 of these units, stack them together, and use it for a small or medium business, or to power a church, or to power a refugee camp, or some non-government organization that requires heat and power and hot water. You know, humanitarian efforts and things like that. They could stack these units as opposed to buying like a big diesel generator or some other purpose, you know, some other product that would give you the same result, but it would be much more expensive to install and it'd be much more expensive on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, now that you're explaining the details of your product, it explains to me, or makes it clear to me, why something like a portable thorium or fusion reactor would be so good.
Well, yeah,
Like if
I
you
was going to say the
somehow
same
could
thing.
combine
The
the
thing that kind
two.
of really gets me. No, sorry. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. Well, let
I
me
just
jump in.
wanted to finish my thought that, like, that you would combine the cheapness of production of nuclear with the modularity and portability of this kind of solution.
Yeah, I think that's what gets me excited about stuff like this in general, is it kind of puts the power on the individual to produce everything they need. Like, kind of fast forward, whatever, 10, 20, even 50 years out, where we have this kind of small modular, maybe mini fusion reactor that could go in a system like this, that's already kind of been designed and mass produced. You can replace the propane with just about any kind of energy source. And if you could have some kind of, you know, small modular fusion reactor at some point, Mr. Fusion from Back to the Future. If we ever get there, I've been waiting for it forever. I really want it someday. Throw some pop in there, and you've got all the power to get your 1.3 gigawatts of energy for time travel. But that's what excites me, is it all starts here. You know, getting the kinks worked out so that whatever the power of the future is, we can easily, you know, match it in and then make it so that anyone can live anywhere in the world. You could live potentially even in the sky if you had enough power with your jet rotors, or in the North Pole if you have enough heat. So just systems like this that can kind of be off grid and have the potential to let anyone build a community or a brand new community up in the middle of nowhere, and you can power it and run all the energy you need on your own. I think that's the beauty of this. Is it's
You would just have to change the name of the product to more X, like the higher number in front of the X.
Well, the issue around some of these kind of like pie in the sky concepts, like, you know, a battery that has 1 million cycles, or you know, a generator that produces unlimited power or something. So these technologies, like, they haven't reached commercialization. They haven't reached economies. They may come along in the future. The technology that I'm implementing is not so much about the technology of, you know, creating a better battery or a better solar panel or something. I'm taking existing technologies that, you know, you look at the internal combustion engine, it's been around for over 100 years, but it's been used in the worst way possible, where 80% of the energy is just completely wasted, right? So I'm taking existing technologies that are already at economies of scale, right? And this was the beauty, and this was the genius behind Tesla, was that when they approached building a electric car, they didn't try to create a whole new battery from scratch, right? They took batteries that were already used in laptops and sold on the mass market, and they repurposed them to work within their vehicle because they were lightweight, they were economical, and the technology already existed and was on the market, right?
Sure. Like, what I meant is that
feasible.
what's great about your solution is that you've the concept of modularity. What I would like to, the term that could be used to these similar approaches, where you took something that previously had to be centralized and you had to have central infrastructure to everybody, and everybody sort of had to rely on a bunch of experts or bureaucrats somewhere else. That you take it and you package it in a way that an individual person can use it. And the modularity, also just what I meant to imply, is that comes with the fact that you can be swapping, you know, even further. You could be swapping the components of the module, which wouldn't change the fact, or like what's good about it, the fact that it's modular. Especially like for similar reasons, of all the like pie in the sky technologies that became real and practical, 3D printing in particular, because that's then something, if you have some sort of modular designs, and if you then could parts of them or all of them like 3D print them, for instance, it's like a multiplier of this. It's like you could exponentially multiply the benefit of these individually very good technologies or concepts.
Right. Yeah. Now, your other question was about solar, my thoughts on solar. So the existing, like the vast majority of solar that you see is not connected into batteries or anything. It's connected right back into the grid. And this causes some issues for both for all the people that don't have solar, right? But it can also create some issues for the grid itself. And the issue is that solar is not produced, it's not always produced when you need it, right? So sometimes it's produced when you don't need it, and sometimes you don't have enough of it when you do need it, right? And that means that we are still relying, the vast majority, over 99, and you know, in Ontario it's over 99% is produced from other sources, right? Is produced, we still need all the diesel generators that back up, the nuclear power, the natural gas, we need all water power and all these things. We need all of our infrastructure and everything, right? And what is going on is, in certain areas, like this is happening in Nova Scotia and also in California, hydro companies, they don't like solar, right? They don't want people to have solar, because if you have solar on your home, you're not really paying anything for hydro. You're paying a few bucks or whatever. But your neighbor, he's paying more, because for a few reasons. One is you likely got that equipment with some kind of government incentive or whatever, so his taxes are paying for your system, right? But also, you're not contributing to the cost of maintaining that grid like he is, right? So, you know, when the grid goes down and they have to send a truck out in the middle of the night, he's paying for that, you're not, even though your system requires that truck to go out. right? The solar panel systems that are connected into the grid, they still require all of the infrastructure, right? They require all the power lines, everything, but you're not paying for it, right? You're only supplying energy. You're not contributing anything to the upkeep and maintenance of the whole system. And that pits people against each other, right? Especially if you're in a situation where you can't install solar, right? If you're in like an apartment, or you're in some area, you got trees everywhere, or your neighbor's got a huge house and it doesn't make sense to do solar because you're in the shade all the time, right? So now you're in a situation where I have to pay for this guy's to be connected to the grid. I can't go solar. Maybe I can't afford to go solar or whatever. So that pits people against each other, which creates political problems, right? And the politicians will try to solve that and say, okay, they propose various solutions. I'm not up to date on what some of the solutions that have been implemented, but they've actually, in some areas, they're proposing charging people that have solar a monthly fee, to like an extra monthly fee, right? So now the guy that puts solar up, he's got to pay to put energy back into the grid, and now his return on investment is kind of a wash because he's lost his benefit of having the solar panel system on his home, right? And that's like a disincentive for people to go solar. But it's fair. Like, that is actually fair because he's got to pay his fair share to be connected. Even if he's putting in solar, he still needs power at all hours of the day, 24 hours a day, the reliability of the whole system. He still needs that, right? So grid connected solar it does help a little bit, but it can only help so much because without a battery component, right? Without storing that energy for when we need it later on, it doesn't have it will never be like the end all be all solution, right?
All right, let's
lastly, you asked about I think I may have answered this question already. I think you asked where this can be implemented, and I think I covered that. So
Yeah, the environmental conditions and stuff, or depending on the distance from the center of the grid. I guess that, just to sum up what I sort of took from your answers regarding the Czech situation currently, for instance, I guess it does make sense in a country like Czech Republic to rely on nuclear power plants because we're a very small country with a very dense population. So the maintenance of the grid, I guess, isn't that big of a problem for our territory specifically. But I can definitely see how it's entirely different in any country like United States or Russia or Canada with large areas, how it's not that end-all be-all solution by any means. And also that I guess ultimately, if every house that could had like a solar panels hooked to a battery to decrease whatever electricity they actually need to take from the grid, but not necessarily have it connected to the grid. And if people had like a system like yours, also with the generator for a backup in case grid goes down, which can inevitably happen in basically anywhere for at least some period of time, then overall, I guess that would be for environmental reasons and also economic reasons and also just protecting life reasons would probably be a pretty good system overall, at least now that how I see it after your argument.
right.
Yeah,
So
I think
that's the essence of my business.
yeah, thanks so much for sharing, Stuart. I think to try to change gears a little bit. So I think to kind of wrap up that discussion, in my mind, it kind of comes down again. The average individual doesn't really want to know all the details of how they get power. We all pay, like Stuart started, we pay a certain amount every month. We just want the power. So if a system like this can kind of become easy to implement, easy to understand, you just plop it in there and it can kind of get you your power that you need at a relatively, lower rate or even a similar rate to before with the extra environmental benefits. People will buy it. It's just a matter of getting the right market, whether it's off-grid people to start, and eventually once the prices come down low enough or the energy technologies change, I could see everyone in the world having this eventually with in a perfect world.